Before we start, I really just need to thank the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom for sending me to COP. I went in 2022 to Egypt, and as a delegate observer, and the last 2 years I've gone virtually, and we wouldn't be having this talk if it hadn't been for them. So thank you. We do not inherit the earth from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children. And I put this up to remind us that when we're talking about climate change, as difficult as it is for people around the world now, and all of us, it's going to be much more difficult for future generations. And as you use, I wanted to call attention to our sixth principle, the goal of a world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all, and of course the interconnected web of life as well, our seventh principle. Both of these are just critical when we look at climate change. So I'm not really going to talk directly about the younger generation that much, but I just wanted to have you keep that in the back of your mind as we do this. Militarism and wars are taking us in the wrong direction. They're using up our economic and environmental resources for dead ends at a time when we desperately need to transition away from fossil fuels and to renewable energy and help save this planet. So Baku, Azerbaijan, a beautiful place. I didn't actually go there in person this year. I did get to go to Egypt for COP 2027, but I attended virtually the last 2 years. So I was really fortunate just to be able to get in that way, actually. They only gave us one ticket for WILF, which is 50 countries to send somebody. So I probably won't be able to go again, having gone once. I also wanted to call out this slide particularly because it was for the faith communities. And there was one of these side events was put on at the Faith Pavilion. Well, this particular one I'm talking about. But for the first time ever at COP, they have a faith pavilion, and there's more than 58 different organizations, faith groups that are working there. And I just think it really opens up a door for all of us when we think about reverence for the earth, and reverence for each other and respect for one another. That's just absolutely critical. Dealing with the process of being at COP, in my experience and the experience of most people that I talk to, is incredibly stressful. It's not going there for fun to be in another country. It's just a lot of work. So, and particularly because of the divisions, you know why you're there, you know what you want to accomplish, and then you see the obstacles that you're up against. So I'm going to start out, I'm just going to do a little bit here on climate, where we are right now. And then what I've decided to do as I present this to you is I'm going to do a coverage of a lot of things instead of focusing on any one thing. So you'll just have kind of a broad overview. 2023 was the hottest year on record at the time. It's the first year in history where the 1.C Celsius temperature above pre-industrial times was reached every single month for that entire year. And then 2024 beat that record out. And they announced that on the very opening day of COP. I mean, so we know that what we're dealing with is incredibly serious. And of course, this year is projected to be hotter than the next. So carbon dioxide levels are the highest they've been in 3.6 million years, and levels of methane and nitrous oxide higher than at any point in the last million years. We know what's going on at the Amazon rainforest, the lungs of the earth. These fires are actually being set purposely to clear the land for grazing, for cattle, for meat production. And what's happening is the vitality of the rainforest is being lost. And in 2005 and 2010, it temporarily turned from a carbon sink into a carbon source. This is one of the many tipping points that we're dealing with. This slide is an old one. I've been using it for years. It's still the same thing, only much worse. Ocean temperatures are rising at the rate similar to adding 5 or 6 Hiroshima bombs of heat, not in a year or a month or a week, but every second. And this has been going on now for about 30 years. So 91% of the heat from the atmosphere goes into the ocean. So we're very fortunate that we've had the ocean there to absorb all of this heat for us. It can only absorb that heat for so long. And when it stops and it's not able to take it in anymore, then we will have a cascading events and all kinds of things are going to happen. And it'll happen very quickly at that point. Also on this slide, you'll see in the lower left-hand corner, I have a little tiny ship. And I put that there as a reminder to me to share with all of you that in Trump's plans, Project 2025, one of the cuts that he wants to make is to cut funding for NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Association. And so many of us rely on that service they provide. They have incredibly excellent data on climate. It's a resource for the world, and it would be horrific to lose it. But I just wanted to let you know that that's one of the things that we'll probably be facing as we go forward. Also, while I was there online, I guess I really felt like I was there. I was online with it so much. Anyway, Al Gore, you see him there with his hands out raised. He had a really amazing talk. You can still find it online if you want to look. It's there, his talk at COP. And he's asking, what are we doing? We are not stopping fossil fuels. We're letting the fossil fuel industry run everything. And he also announced that the Greenland ice sheet is melting at the rate of 33 million tons an hour. And for some reason, that just really grabbed me personally. I couldn't imagine it. I mean, I know that's a lot of ice, but that's how quickly this whole thing is moving. This is a little map that shows various tipping points around the world. They're scattered all over. Of course, the rainforest, the mountain glaciers, West Antarctic ice sheet. This next slide that I'm going to show you, this was taken from a TED Talk by Johan Rockström, and it was just amazing. He's an incredible climate scientist. You might want to get online and try to watch it yourself. He did this, I think, about 2 months before COP, and I credit him down there below. This was his sheet, and what he's telling us is that now that we're at where we are at the 1.5, those top 4 tipping points, the Greenland ice sheet, the West Antarctic ice sheet, and the tropical coral reef die-off, as well as the northern permafrost abrupt thaw, are all taking place right now. These others are a little more distant, but they're coming up too. Let's see, there's one here, Barents Sea ice loss. I guess that's happening as well. Anyway, a wonderful resource if you have time to check out Johan Rockström. This gentleman also works with Rockström at the Potsdam Institute for Impact Research. And he gave a really great talk at COP and about planetary boundaries, what we can do and what we can't do. Anders Leverman, professor of climate dynamics, or it might be Lieberman. The climate system is complex, he says. The jet stream is meandering more and more. This kind of fireworks will bring our economies and societies to the verge of collapse. This is not a physical tipping point, but well, we are dealing physical tipping points, but he was directing his attention at the time to societal tipping points, that things are going to happen so quickly that our societies are not going to be able to stand up to them the way that we need them to. And then Professor Jim Skia, he is the head of the IPCC, and he's just brilliant and wonderful. And he tells us this is the new normal. Children born today will not know a world without climate change. We have shown that carbon pricing, regulations, and other interventions have already resulted in gigatons of avoided emissions. More can be achieved if policies and measures are scaled up and deployed more widely. So, I mean, we're not at the point where we can't do anything. We've got to try to do what we can where we are. Despair is not as an option, as they say. So what does this mean for our future? Right now, we're already locked into about 20 years of temperatures at the level that we're experiencing. And the only way to change this for the future is to reduce our fossil fuel use. They stay in the atmosphere for a very long time. And the only option, really, so we're ruling out all kinds of false premises here on what we can do. But we have to reduce our carbon emissions to zero. And if you notice he's saying zero, he is not saying net zero. At COP, they say net zero. And that allows for carbon trading and all kinds of sleights of hand. But it doesn't go to actually zero carbon emissions. That's what we have to really do. The United States holds the global record for having released the most cumulative emissions in the world. That's more than 509 gigatons of CO2 since 1850. It is also the largest per capita user of fossil fuels. Now, I'm saying per capita because China is surpassing the United States in the total number of emissions that we're putting out. But they have a much bigger population than we do. So even though they are passing us up in the number of total emissions on the per capita level, the United States is still being the largest producer of emissions. So when you think about your checking account, I should think about mine more often. The remaining carbon budget, we can kind of make an analogy to that. There's only so much in your checking account, and you can't go past that or you're going to be out of money. Well, it's the same thing with the carbon budget. When we use up so much carbon, then we're very likely to be unable to have human intervention. And so the remaining carbon budget for 2024 was 200 gigatons of CO2. And we are due to run out of that at the current rate in 4 years. So we're talking about very serious action that needs to be done and is not being done. And at the same time, we're facing a president who is a climate denier and girl, baby, girl. So our challenges are cut out for us. I also wanted to bring the remaining carbon budget into mind for everyone because unlike my checking account, which is my own private checking account, and for me to spend however I feel I'm called to do, the remaining carbon budget belongs to the entire world. And so the United States has been the biggest cumulative user for since the beginning of the carbon output. And we've used that any way we like. And the global north continues to do that without regard to the fact that there's all of these other countries that are desperately in need of a little bit of help. I mean, there's 600 million Africans that are without electricity. So, we should be sharing, but that's not in the picture. We're seeing that all around the world, people are really suffering. These people are flooded out. And delegates from the small island nations, the least developed countries in the global south are asking for justice. They are expecting us to pay up. And there's a reason why they're expecting us to pay up rather than just that that's the moral thing to do. It's because in 1992 at the Rio conference, the first conference, everyone agreed, the wealthy nations and the poorer nations, that this is what we would do, that we would have a larger share of the burden in terms of helping them financially so that we could all move towards mitigating climate together. But then we really haven't followed through with that. And so there's been a lot of upset for a number of years. So while climate change is a global problem, the world recognizes that it was caused by us and they expect us to meet our responsibilities. Under the Trump administration, with his drill baby drill, we can probably expect him to produce oil, continue to produce oil more than any other nation in the world is. We have been doing that since the later part of the Biden administration. And we can also expect him, I'm sure, to put an end to the EPA. We can expect him to pull out of the Paris Accords. Anything to do with climate is going to be a problem under his administration. We already know that. He has a lot of hostility towards climate, and heading into COP29, it was a shadow over the entire event. He's probably also likely to take us out of other UN organizations like the World Health Organization, Human Rights Council, UNESCO. And the person that he's chosen for his UN representative, Elise Stefanik, and one of the webinars that I've watched, they are thinking that this might very well may mean that he won't take us out of the UN completely, but maintain enough of a foothold that his ambassador, Stefanik, will be able to go further into controlling the actions of the petrostates in the direction that he would prefer. So as we head into COP also, we're seeing other disruptions across the face of the earth. Just in the last couple of months, we saw the United States, China, and Russia all send up ICBMs. The first time in 40 years that China has sent up an ICBM. Also, Russia had launched a hypersonic weapon against Ukraine. It's a weapon the United States does not have. And these things are warnings. They are putting us on notice, of course, that the United States hegemony is dead and gone, for one thing. The majority of the world's countries are moving away from supporting the United States. There's a lineup of nations wanting to join BRICS. And the fact that the United States has been complicit in the genocide in Gaza is part of this as well. The majority of the world is absolutely turned off by this, and you see this all the time in resolutions that are the General Assembly is putting up in relation to Gaza, or that come before the United Nations, and the United States vetoes them. So this was my pass to get in, allowed to have a certain level of participation. So one of the things that happened to start off at COP was Azerbaijan's president, Ilham Aliyev, said that oil, he's an oil producing country, or Azerbaijan is a gift of God, and that therefore we should appreciate oil. And that really left a bad taste in the mouth of many climate activists and set the tone, I believe, for the entire conference. And following the playbook that we've seen over the last 3 years, and probably before, but at least the last 3 years, Mukhtar Babayev, the president of CPO 29, was again a leading figure in the state's national oil company, SOCAR. In COP 28, Sultan Al Jaber had been the president of his nationalized oil company, ADNOC. We also saw both of these nations round up their activists, climate people, others, and jail them ahead of COP. Egypt jailed thousands. Azerbaijan is a smaller country. They jailed hundreds. But both of these countries have human rights issues. So this is getting to be the third year now where we see an oil company with the presidency based in an oil producing nation. But it's not just these countries that have inhibited the actions of COP. I need for us to recall the fact that in 1997, the Department of Defense ensured that military missions be excluded from mandatory reporting to the United Nations Framework on Climate Change. And that reporting remains optional. This is one of the key things that I worked on when I went to Egypt. We had handouts, we talked to people. I was very fortunate to have the opportunity to address the US State Department in a meeting with UN delegates there. And I represented myself there as a member of Veterans for Peace, Climate Crisis and Militarism Project, and the UUs, as well as WILF, who sent me there, the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. So they really were listening. They let me take the time to say what I needed to say. Of course, they haven't moved on it. They haven't taken it seriously, but it did alert everyone in the room about that. And over the last few years since that time, those people on the ground in COP have made tremendous strides in getting the word out to this largest convention on climate in the world, that the military is a big producer of fossil fuels, and these fossil fuels are not being counted. I mean, I think we have turned the corner on that. So even though I'm very unhappy with how COP is going, the presence of activists there have made a difference. We still have a long ways to go. That's happening. Yeah, a very long ways to go. Yeah, really. I also wanted to call out some of the things that we tend to forget. One of them being that in 1953, the CIA overthrew Iran's democratically elected President Mossadegh. He died on house arrest. They got the Shah of Iran for 10 years before they rebuilt. So the people of Iran, who looks like we really want to support Israel and going to war against, there's history there that most Americans don't know about or don't remember. But the rest of the world has a longer memory because it happened to them. Then also in terms of things we might want to remember in terms of COP, Edward Snowden's revelations proved that the United States were spying on diplomats at COP 13 in 2007, and US National Security, NSA, spied on governments in Copenhagen in 2009. WikiLeaks also released diplomatic cables that showed the CIA had sought intelligence from UN diplomats about negotiations. All of this to give us an upper hand when we speak ourselves. So I'm going to move away from that now, and I want to start moving into some specific issues that we addressed at COP this year. Ghana's president, Afruko Addo, reported that the Green Ghana Project planted 50 million trees. Do you like that, Lucy? She's our tree planter at UUJEC. So he did this through Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. Ghana was able to mobilize 800 million by trading carbon credits with Switzerland and Sweden. The carbon market plan originated as part of the Paris Agreement, allowing nations and businesses to purchase credit offsets that would typically benefit vulnerable nations. So while this slide presents those best intentions of the carbon market, the plan lacked clear regulatory measures and in practice left the whole process open to abuse, allowing a purchase of credits while continuing to pollute. While recognizing these problems, COP efforts to set an agreed upon process in place stalled for years. However, on the opening day at COP29, an international committee working on this Article 6 issue gavelled in their rudimentary framework, and that was continued to be worked on at COP. It remains weak and will continue to need improvement going forward. I'm going to talk now just a bit about nuclear energy. The COP is pushing nuclear technology very hard, and last year the declaration to triple nuclear energy aimed at expanding capacity threefold by 2050 was signed by 25 countries. I think that by the end of COP they had at least that many more countries that were signing on to it. Nuclear energy was spotlighted as a carbon-free nuclear, as a carbon-free technology. Australia was not interested. 6 other nations, including the EU, joined right away. But people, it's also something that James Hansen's calling for as what we need to do. So there's just differing opinions about this, but the world is going forward with this. The Women's International League for Peace and Freedom is really adamant that, and many others of us are as well, that nuclear energy is not the answer in terms of the urgency of getting off of fossil fuels, particularly if we have such a short carbon budget time left. It takes so much time to get these nuclear energy power plants up and running. And it also ignores the other dangers associated with nuclear energy. So now I'm going to, those were some special issues that I really just wanted to bring up for you all. The finance COP and the peace COP is how this was built to many of us around the world. And while peace and finance are typically seen as greatly disparate subjects, they are really very deeply interconnected, and fossil fuels is really the key link. Global militaries are destroying our atmosphere as their emissions are 5.5% of the global whole annually at a cost of 2.4 trillion a year. And that 5.5% does not include any war-related emissions. Rather than prioritize peace, governments are choosing to fight over the last drop of oil rather than move towards a livable planet. And this is a choice. It's a choice. We can't have both. I'm sure everyone in this room already knows the U.S. military is the world's leading institutional user of fossil fuels and producer of greenhouse gas emissions. We don't have time to get into this at any sort of depth at all, but the military blueprint is enormous. The supply chains, the space, everything that we do, the building of the warships, the F-35s, all of this, and the fuel to run the wars. It's insane. Garrett Reppenhagen, our former VFP executive director, said the administration and Secretary of Defense's failure to address the role of the U.S. military that it plays in the climate crisis continues to enable one of the largest contributors of environmental destruction U.S. armed forces. And then we have to recall this. Wars for oil and oil for wars are an endless cycle that has helped to maintain the centrality of the status quo. The big winners are the defense industry and the fossil fuel industry. I'm moving now away from the military, and I'm going to talk about something. This happened on the very last day, or the very end of COP, but the New York Times reports that Saudi Arabia's negotiators were a wrecking ball on the negotiations on energy transition. So what this really means is that COP28, for the first time in history, had the words fossil fuel in their final document, and all of the nations in COP, which is very, very hard to do, to get everybody on the same page, pledged to transition away from fossil fuels. However, that really disturbed Saudi Arabia, and they made sure that that did not happen this year. That it was a setback, that language was not carried forward, and will be discussed again next year. The issue in Gaza, according to Lancet, the number of deaths is closer to 200,000 than the reports we see, because those reports don't count, for one thing, all of the people buried in the debris. And we know buried in that debris is also the white phosphorus, all the bombs that were used on these people. And there was 281,000 megatons of emissions put into the atmosphere just during the first 60 days of the war against Gaza. And how can we call it a war? It's a flat out genocide. What are these people fighting back with? Not much. They've had a few missiles, but there's no comparison. We all know that. And this is having an impact worldwide in terms of the United States becoming more isolated, just as Israel is becoming more isolated. Military emissions annually at this point are calculated to be 2,750 million tons of CO2. These are estimated also to be at 5.5% of the whole, and this is not including war-related emissions. The environmental and economic impacts of militarism and wars have become a part of the discourse at COP, yet they are not yet being officially acted on. However, at COP, there were many heads of state that made a call for peace. These included the Crown Prince of Jordan, who has 3% of his, 30% of his population are refugees. 30%. President Vučić of Serbia, President Mohamed Yunus Al-Yanif of Libya, and President, I'm not sure I'm going to say his name right, Besorovic of Bosnia, and also Dr. Mohamed Musa of Maldives also spoke, and I'm going to share a little bit from each of their talks with each of you. So Crown Prince of Jordan gave an eloquent speech. He said, "My part of the world is already exposed to harsh realities of climate change, to heat, to drought, to loss of biodiversity. War is compounding environmental challenges for Gaza and beyond. Entire communities are now graveyards of debris. An inclusive, just approach to the climate challenge requires that we address the links between climate, peace, and security." Vučić has spoken about the need for peace before at these things. He said, we have several problems. We need to restore peace in the world. Nobody's talking about world peace because everybody wants to win. I urge all of the big powers to solve the problems in Ukraine, in the Middle East, and everywhere around the world, and then we will be able to solve the other problems. The rich and the big create problems, and the small and the poor countries pay the price. He got a good hand for that. From the Maldives, we see funds flowing freely to wage war, but scrutinized when it's for climate adaptation. We need to reprioritize and revise the international finance system. It has underscored the urgent need for a new climate finance goal that aligns with the true scale of the climate crisis. And that's what we need to do. Asserting that the need is in trillions, not billions. The people that were attending here, the diplomats, especially everyone from these developing countries, they know, they understand that they cannot put forth and actually determine contributions that are worth anything unless they have the money to do that. They can't adapt to climate change without the money, and they can't mitigate it without the money, and they need trillions to do that. This is an accepted amount of money and has been for a certain amount of time. Of course, it's not forthcoming. So Livia said, from our direct experience of climate events in Africa, climate change is having a devastating impact on the planet. It's imperiling lives and our concerns for the future. Conflicts are intensifying, and we welcome the call for a truce to reduce military activities. We encourage the presidency to renew its call each time for peace. From Bosnia and Herzegovina, the state of our planet is alarming. Climate change is the result of irresponsible human actions. By industrialization, the earth has endangered, men have endangered themselves. We live in a time when the pursuit of money and short-term profit often overshadows the warnings of scientists. Let's not forget, the earth does not belong to humans, but humans belong to earth. So the next person I'm talking, sharing what he has to say, is not a head of state, but a critical member of. This is a talk from the leader, Elsad Iskandarov, who is heading up the Baku call on climate action for peace, relief, and recovery. So within COP, they have been calling for peace in the sense of having one day, a thematic day of peace, and they've mixed it with relief and recovery and also included energy this year. And he's saying that what they want to do is address the needs of people that are in conflict. They can't get money to the people that are in conflict. It's too disorganized, it's too widespread, and they are in dire need. So that is a true vulnerability. Many people impacted by conflict and climate at the very same time. However, in this press conference, which was, I felt was very tight, kind of regimented, the whole COP felt that way to me. He was asked a question at the end by the Irish Independent. It was an excellent question, and it was much more detailed than I am able to present here, but it says, we are speaking here on the impacts of climate on conflict. Can we also speak on the impacts of conflict on climate? So, for example, should the reporting of military emissions be made mandatory, not just in the context of fuel and energy use, but in the loss of embodied carbon in the built environments that are destroyed, and the loss of carbon, natural carbon, and the carbon sinks through damage to natural landscapes. And what we saw Mr. Iskandarov, I think it's Dr. Iskandarov, respond is, what we want to do is we want to end these wars. We've got to keep in mind that military missions are very small. So right there, I just did not feel comfortable that they haven't accepted that in an official big effort within the COP to call for peace. So there were also a number of side events at COP, and I'm so grateful for these side events. They're very powerful, and this is where we're getting the word out. And so COP, what makes us safe? And we're using the word safe instead of the word of national security. We're using the word safe as activists when we talk about climate. And we're negotiating in this COP for increased finance. This one says, yet everyone in this room who is a major fuel extraction company except Colombia is increasing their oil and gas extraction. And outside war spreading and finance for the military is at the highest levels, higher levels than any time since the Cold War. So they put on a fantastic panel. And I don't have time to get into various panels, but I'm only gonna address one other panel. And this panel was exemplary because we had speaking to us, Wilf's Shireen Jurdi. She is in Lebanon, and I've been on calls with her on Zoom where she was just devastated and panicked. She lives right in Beirut. And while she was in this call at COP, people could hear the bombs falling in the background. And she tells us there is no climate justice during war. And there is no ecological justice during war. With every bomb that drops, the land, the sea, and the people suffer irreparable harm. So today, more than half of the world's women and children are living in countries facing serious climate impacts, and the same is true of active conflict. The community cannot continue to ignore their plight. These women are dying at 14 times the rate of their male counterparts during conflicts. You know, you can think of women, their role in life, we take care of our children. We're caretakers. And so I can envision that when these things are happening, the tremendous sacrifices that they're making. So this is a feminist issue at COP, and it's one I won't belabor here, but it's evident throughout COP. And then, of course, we know that millions of people have been forced to flee just in 2023. That number is just the tip of the iceberg. There's tens of millions of people that are being displaced from previous and ongoing conflicts, violence, and disasters. So that also includes climate. Standing between a potentially livable planet and unfathomable suffering of all species, including our own, is this 1.3 trillion of annual financing desperately needed by nations of the global south. The poorer nations already drowning in debt require these funds in the form of grants and very concessionary loans in order to move forward. This is very difficult for them. They're already debt-ridden. The need is staggering. G77 called for this year's COP to fund what they call the NCQG. The new collective quantified goal is the new term for financing at COP at a level of 1.3 trillion. And this is really much less than I heard IMF mention COP last year, where they were projecting that 2.4 trillion would be needed. And that was also the figure put out by independent high-level expert group on climate finance between now and 2030. But so this number that was put out by the G77, which is the larger number of nations, the poorer number of nations, were really cutting what the experts were saying to a more reasonable figure, hoping that that would be met. I don't know how all of you feel, but I just really have the greatest admiration for Jeffrey Sachs. He plays a key role at the United Nations for Sustainable Development. He's been with them for years. He's an incredible economist, and I sat in on this session. It was a wonderful session, and they were figuring out how they were going to raise this money. And he just started this session out saying, okay, we need trillions of dollars. There's no way that the global south is going to get this money from the United States or the global north. He said what they are going to have to do, we can't fight Trump on this, he says, what we are going to have to do, or what they're going to have to do, is align themselves with the BRICS nation and China, because China has the will, and they have, they're more willing to part with the funds. And so that was his initial take. I'm going to come back to him because then they had a discussion and he came to another conclusion. But in the meantime, I just want to show why he was suggesting that the poorer nations turn to China. China has a population of over 1.4 billion people. 1/5 of humanity is of Chinese heritage. Its land mass equals 1/4 of the Earth's land surface. It also has risen as an economic superpower and has been foreseen for the last 20 years to become a major competitor. It is essential for the sake of the world and humanity that these rivalries are managed well enough to allow cooperation towards meeting climate goals and avoiding war. China's rise to an economic superpower. You can see in this graph, there's 3 countries listed below: China, the United States, and then the EU, which is a group of countries. And then we see the first triangle, or the first rectangle there, a lighter color, and then the dark one. And this shows the difference between 2002 and 2022 in terms of the nation's gross domestic product. So what we see in China is a rise of 18.8% over that time. In the United States, we see a fall from 19.8% to 15.8%. And then in the EU, a drop from 19.9 to 14.8. China is on the rise, and it looks like, even with setbacks, that this will continue. But there's other reasons for us to be looking to China. On the climate front, China has taken the lead as it transitions to a low carbon economy. It is still using coal. It is still putting out tremendous amounts of fossil fuels. However, it is at the same time making a major structural change. It now has twice as much wind and solar under construction as the rest of the world combined, and expects to reach peak oil by 2025 if it hasn't already. It's also producing and dominating electric vehicles, and they have the electric vehicle market with over 13 million vehicles sold last year, 1/3 of global car sales. This is not a pleasant prospect for the United States. And President Biden announced he will quadruple the tariff rate on Chinese EVs from 25% to 100%. Trump intends to do that as well, carry it at 100%. And anyone importing Chinese EVs will have to pay that right. Despite the fact that these are highly desirable 250-mile range cars that sell for $10,000. The BRICS nations, as of October 25th of 2024, now includes Algeria, Belarus, Bolivia, Brazil, China, Cuba, Indonesia, Iran, Kazakhstan, Malaysia, Nigeria, Russia, South Africa, Thailand, Turkey, Uganda, Uzbekistan, and Vietnam. They are on the move. There are many other countries seeking to get in. So now I'm coming back to Jeffrey Sachs, and they've had this long discussion about what they possibly can do to change the whole thing with the finances, because this is a finance cop, really. It really wasn't a peace cop. It was labeled as a peace cop. It was really a finance cop. But even as a finance cop, it's not doing what needs to be done. And so they had a lot of very technical economic discussions. Some of it was impossible for me to really follow. But he did come up with a plan, a really good plan. And he also is the head of Columbia University's Sustainable Development um, uh, Solutions Network at Columbia University. And they are going to do research that they decided was going to be helpful in getting private financing. And he hopes that we can put together a financial plan for success, that for countries without electricity, without water, we need to get you 40-year money so you can grow at 8% a year for the next 35 years. This is important because these African countries, because they have such a poor credit rating, they're just not getting the money they need. Now, this came from a side event. It was a comment, a side comment, and I was so glad to hear it, because it shows that insiders at a high level are understanding what activists have been trying, the point we've been trying to make at COP the last few years. And he said, if we're able to spend 2,400 billion, which is 2.4 trillion a year right now on defense expenditures and armies globally, how do we rationalize finding 100 or 150 billion altogether to invest in the greatest threat to humankind in the 21st century? So I just had to include that as an example of the change that's taking place within COP in understanding the role of military. Governments are prioritizing military at about 30 times more than they are climate. Bolivia, I just always love hearing from this man, Diego Pacheco, who heads up the delegation to Bolivia. He says we need a finance which will probably grant us the resources we need to take steps. The finance that was offered is usually below our requirements. It is an insult. He's talking about the 250 billion that was offered on the last day of COP. So this is one of the very final slides I'm going to show you of what takes place within COP. He says we're moving from international cooperation to every man for himself. And then just to call this out, I thought it was a really important point that the money that we are spending on climate in these international conferences or in the various countries, what we can expect in the next 25 years is that we will have a 20% decrease in economic growth around the world. Things are going to slow down because we're going to have tremendous impacts from climate. And this is about 6 times higher than the mitigation costs that we have in the next 20 years. So he's telling us that we need to do it now. We need to pay for it now. We need to do everything we can to get these monies to the poor people now and fight climate change and fossil fuels now, because it's going to get very much worse rather rapidly. So I was on the edge of my seat when this was going on. COP negotiations, excuse me, went on for 19 hours after COP was over. These people are in negotiations. Picture the developing nations as having a very small capacity, small delegations. They cannot afford to send too many people. The wealthy nations have, you know, maybe a couple hundred delegates, so people can sleep and come back. And they've been told they're only going to get 250 billion. They also have learned that we're transitioning away from the agreement last year about getting out of fossil fuels. And at one point, their leader, the finance negotiator, McKay Robertson, raises his flag. He's the finance negotiator for the Alliance of Small Island States. And he says, we're not being heard. He said this because the other countries were laughing at them for asking for more money. And when he said that, just spontaneously, they did not have this planned. It's in the press that it was planned. He said it was not planned. They realized they were not being heard, and they got up and left. And they did not know when they left if they would come back or not. And the small island nations did not ever return to negotiations. What it means for them is this is a death sentence. The way we're doing this, they are already feeling the impacts of climate so severely. Their people are dying. They aren't going to outlive this, especially the really small islands. The bigger nations, the bigger islands, they can move in, they can last a while. Some of these island states have already moved their people 3 or 4 times. They had to leave. They knew they weren't getting what they needed. In the interim, the negotiators came up with another 50 billion to offer them, but they had already left. So this was a side event from the Union of Concerned Scientists, Rachel Cletus, and she says, we will be joining millions of others to fight back against the egregious actions of the Trump administration, including in the courts. We are going to fight the anti-science and unjust actions as well as fossil fuel industry actions. So that's one thing that I think we can all feel supported with, that we are not going to be alone in this. Al Gore, who is saying, what are we doing? The experience in Baku illuminates deeper flaws in the COP process, including the outsized influence of fossil fuel interests that have hobbled the process since the beginning. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has been particularly obstructive, putting the future of humanity at severe risk. So everybody, thank you for sticking through that. Yes, COP has come to a close, and with it, the hopes of many people, particularly the island people. Some 5 years ago, however, in a Fiji university, law students took up the challenge of addressing climate change. And this led to them taking it to the General Assembly of the United Nations, where a resolution was passed. And that has now gone before the International Court of Justice. And so what we are seeing there now is the culmination of several years' work. Vanuatu and 97 other nations are seeking climate justice in this wonderful student-organized ICJ climate case. It's the most widely supported case in history, and we are now awaiting their decision. It was a profound, it opened with a statement from Vanuatu's Special Envoy for Climate Change and Environment on December 2nd. He said, it is with a profound sense of urgency and responsibility that I stand before you today. The outcome of these proceedings will reverberate across generations, determining the fate of nations like mine and the future of our planet. One of the nations that decided to testify at the ICJ was Palestine. Like many other nations, Palestine's contributions to climate change are tiny. Theirs is only 0.001% of global greenhouse gas emissions. Professor Kay McIntosh, on behalf of the State of Palestine, included this comment in her statement before the court. We urge you to take the impacts of armed conflict and other military activities, including occupation, into account. Sadly, the state of Palestine provides a current and concrete example of how these activities translate into dangerous increases of anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions that impact not just Palestine, but the whole world. Palestine decided that the best way it could contribute to this case was to address the lack of accountability of emissions by aggressors in armed conflict. We submit that the climate crisis requires application of the same stringent standards of due diligence to the protection of the global environment from all emissions of greenhouse gases that contribute significantly to global warming, including emissions from armed conflict and other military activities, as well as occupation. This is the message that WILF, Veterans for Peace, all of our aligned organizations and allies have been trying to bring to COP for the last few years. Hopefully, it will finally be heard. Peace, demilitarize, decarbonize, divest, defund. And this concludes our program on peace for intergenerational and climate justice. We want to get UUJEC and the Peace, Equity, and Climate Task Force again wants to thank the WILF, Veterans for Peace Climate Crisis and Militarism Project, and all of our allies, Code Pink, TPNS, TNI, and COEBS for the considerable efforts to bring these issues to the United Nations. We will now move on with Q&A. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, go ahead, Sally.
I'm just I have a few thoughts. We had I'm a co-host of Ecologic on WBAI, and we had a show a couple of years ago. I think it was COP27 when we talked about the fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty, and I'm glad to see that part continuing, and we need to really focus on that a lot. And what disturbed me also during this COP is that meanwhile, at the exact same time, G20 was meeting over in Brazil. It's like they decided, oh, peace and finance, we don't want to do with that. We'll go do our own business. And do you have that feeling too, Cindy, or am I too cynical?
Oh, no. I was very, very much alarmed by that. In fact, I wanted to get that into the talk, but you see how it was. The talk is so long. Yeah, the most of the leaders did not. Most of the leaders from the G7 didn't show up for this talk. I mean, they didn't show up for this COP, but they all went to the G20 gathering. There were some reasons for that were legitimate. I guess Lulu had been injured or something, but I think they really did not want to face the music of what they were responsible for, and that this was a financial COP. I mean, what we see is the Republican presidents are denying climate change. The Democratic presidents say that they're going to do wonderful things, and then they do a lot more fossil fuel production and very two-faced about it and kind of quiet about it. I mean, you noticed in Kamala Harris's run for the presidency, she didn't talk about climate. How could she? I mean, they're all behind all the fossil fuel and the fracking and all of that. So, yeah, I agree with you. It's an undermining of the legitimacy of COP. And along those same lines, we see Naomi Klein isn't showing up for these things. We see Greta's not showing up for these things. Bill McKibben isn't showing up for these things. They figured it out a while back. It's a wash. There's people there with their heart on their sleeve and really trying to accomplish something. And it's a wonderful opportunity for us to learn and to not work with each other, but in terms of legitimate action, it is not happening. It's delay, 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 and people aren't getting the truth. I mean, it's just pathetic.
Okay. Franz, can you ask a
Yeah.
question?
Cindy, congratulations of giving a real picture of what happened at COP29. And I was at the first climate conference in Rio de Janeiro in 92, and also at the 10th in Cancun. And so the picture that you presented gives a good idea of what's the many things that are going on. At a certain moment you said, I don't know the answer. Now, for about 50 years, I've been studying this as a sustainability sociologist of international development. And my major training was from Columbia University. And I've come up with a solution both to the financing and particularly to the climate. And the solution is that if we change the unjust and therefore unstable and unsustainable international monetary system, if we transform that by basing it on a decarbonization standard, then we will have money and we will have a decarbonized atmosphere. And so I wrote this up in 2012, and the book is called The Tierra Solution: Resolving the Climate Crisis Through Monetary Transformation. And next month, I will have the sequel coming out to that statement, to that framework, which is called the Tierra Tipping Point, from cryptocurrencies, bank money, shadow money, to the digital currency of Tierra of the UN People's Bank. So there is hope. And I think what I am presenting in those two books is a pathway, a realistic pathway for people really to start fighting for a solution. And I've done my best in putting that to paper after study and talking. And I was at the UN for about 30 years, around the UN with NGOs. So I know what's happening both officially and also by the NGO community, by the people community. And so I would say there is hope, but we have not only to transform the economic system, not only to reform, but to transform it. Instead of a reformist Bretton Woods II that the IMF and the establishment is for, what we really need is a Bretton Woods 3.0, which advocates really transforming systems. And that's possible because, as Marcus Mead always used to say, it's the people that make the changes and the politicians follow. And I was very, very pleased with your slide where the Secretary General was meeting with the NGO community and really praised them and admire them and urge them even to work harder. And I really appreciate what you are doing, and that for a whole hour you were able to present in a very visual, attractive way what happened in COP 29. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Franz. It's very exciting to hear that you were there in '92 and again in 2010, I think you said. And I look forward to reading your book. I have to ask you a question. Did you say that you thought that the Bitcoins is the answer? Did you say that?
No, no, no.
I misunderstood.
The opposite. So the sequel,
okay.
the next book is called Tipping Point. It's before and after. And we have to shift from cryptocurrencies, bank money, because it's the whole thing. We have to see this not only internationally, but structurally. And that is what nations really have great difficulty, and even people also, NGOs, have difficulty with, of looking at these issues systemically, and not only in terms of their own company or organization or nation, but in terms of the global system, because the global systems in these globalizing times that are making the impact of what happens also locally.
Wow, that sounds really good. We've got to get your book. Do you want to put your email in the chat?
The email is very simple. And so GAIA1@rcn.com. Rudolph Cat Nicholas.com.
Yeah, Lucy, unmute and say hello.
Hello. My question is about faith involvement. What comes across to me is that the Quakers and Pope Francis have made very strong statements, both on peace and on climate change. And I'm just wondering if there was any action at COP from the faith community coming together, making suggestions, ways we could demonstrate as people of faith publicly, just if you noticed any of that.
Well, what I did hear from people that were there on the ground is that there was enough people there from all these organizations, 58 organizations, that they were talking to people of faith and they were sharing information. So they were doing a lot of networking while they were there. In terms of them coming out and protesting or speaking to their national leaders or whatever other actions, if there were those things, Lucy, and I imagine there were, I don't honestly know about them. I'm sorry. I can check into it though. I'll see if I can find anything out.
Well, it would be wonderful to have a faith movement on the side.
Well,
somewhere.
I mean, we're welcome to join. They've got the Green Church there. You know, they've got Muslims there. They've got all variety of religions there doing these things as faith people. They have their own pavilion, first time ever.
Oh, good. Thank you.
And they did side events the whole time out of there. You know, different groups come in and do presentations.
Okay.
Okay, Sally?
Yeah, I have a couple of thoughts. One, I'm thinking back to General Assembly last year. I think we're all UUs here, and the young adults asking for divestment. And gosh, we need to support our kids. Two, I missed a Green Faith call yesterday because I was an idiot and I missed the time. but they were, they have, they've got a divestment for individuals and churches plans, and I've been attending those meetings for off and on. I think the one yesterday was more about, what we do in the Trump administration, but, so Green Faith is active. We should hook up with them because they have people from all sorts of denominations. Allie Tharp from UU Ministry for Earth has moved over there and is organizing there. So let's
Yeah.
follow her.
Yeah.
Okay. Franz?
Yes, two short kind of notices. The first one, I assume that most of the attendants, the participants, are related to the UU organization. And so I'm a member of the community church in Chapel Hill, and we have made a proposal to the UUA Commission on Social Witness for a new statement of conscience called Reducing the Mounting Monetary Oppression. So we talk about economic oppression, yes, but the subsystems of the economy are also oppressive. And I happen to have studied the monetary one, but also in the fiscal subsystem and the commercial subsystem. They are also really unjust. And because they are unjust, they are unstable. And that means in the long term, unsustainable. And so it's so important that we emphasize the justice-based challenge. And so my whole work is based upon a framework. One of the things I learned from the Rio conference in '92 is that people came up with a framework because things are so complicated. And so I developed a framework within which we can apply both justice, sustainability, governance. And so that is one. The other thing is there is a group in the US affiliated with the American Monetary Institute. And its educational organization is called Alliance for a Just Money. So all of that is coming out both in this statement of conscience proposal, and also, of course, in the book, in the new book for next
Franz?
month.
I think we're getting a little off topic. If you'd like to send something to me, we can share that with other people, but we're talking about climate, and although finance obviously affects how countries get along, it's still just a little farther away from our main topic. Are there any more questions? Okay, I'm going to end it. Thank you, everybody, for attending.
Yeah, thank you. And I saw some familiar people out there. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Patty. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Cindy.
Okay.
Thank you.